my name is Miss Karen. I'm with the Stark Museum of Art, and we are doing this year's Spring Break Art Camp. What's cooking? All with air dry clay. Your handout that you have in your bag is going to go over all of the projects that you have. However, I'd like to use this video just to go over a few tips and tricks for working with air dry clay. We have 3 projects available for you through this camp. We'll be making the fruit plate, which is created through a slab. We'll be making the cinnamon roll bowl, which is created with coils pressed into a bowl. The inside remains smooth, while the outside continues the coil pattern that you create. And the very last project uses up any of the clay that you didn't get to yet. We've got candy beads here for you. We were inspired here by some Skittles, peppermints, and Starburst. I'm going to go over some basic sculpting techniques with you. As you notice, I've got some air dry clay on my hands right now, and it's pretty easy to work with. You can do all kinds of things with this. Sculpt it straight with your hands and make things like balls. This is going to be really useful when you go over to the candy beads. You'll be able to use your skewer and etch lines into it, draw things onto it, or even press your way all the way through it. When it comes to skewering your candy beads, you'll also want to wiggle them around a little bit, make that hole a little bit larger. Another technique we can do is making coils. Coils involves really just making lots of snakes like this. You can just do it straight up and down your hand. I found that for longer snakes, it's actually better if you roll it out on a table. Start in the middle and stretch, 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 stretch to the end. You'll get a long coil like this. And these coils can be manipulated to make any shape you like. I'll show you one of my favorites, which ends up looking a lot like a snail shell. Just swirl, swirl, swirl that around. And you'll be using these to make your cinnamon roll bowl. You do not have to stick with a circular shape. You can go up and down, triangles, squares, whatever works best for you. These are going to be the shapes you'll use. And then another technique you'll be using throughout these projects is creating slabs. For slabs, I like to pat it flat just a little bit with my hand, and I will need to use this roller. Again, if you start in the middle, it will end up with a nicer, even piece. And for the piece we're working on, we actually want a circle, not just an oval. So I'll be moving this around a bit. And around. Sometimes people will flip it over. If you're familiar with making pie crusts, it's a very similar process. One thing to watch out for when creating your slabs is that you really don't want to go too close to the edge and pinch it. If you do, that really flattens out that edge right there. It's not a big deal, it's not the end of the world. Just try to go back to the middle and flatten it back out right into the middle, and that edge will thicken back up a bit. Some things you'll be using with your skewer in this part as well is cutting out cookie cutter type shapes. We're going to be making a circle, pressing all the way through and cutting it out. You can make all kinds of other shapes by doing the same process, making a slab and drawing a shape that you're interested in. When it comes to attaching 2 pieces of clay to each other, just setting a piece of clay right on top of another isn't really enough to help it fix together. A lot of times when we work with stoneware type clays, we'll be doing a more complicated method, but for air dry clays, it's only enough if you just add a tiny bit of water to your finger in between the 2 of them. And when you press, you actually want to jiggle it a little bit in place. That's going to create a sort of suction motion. And then you can press it in and continue sculpting from there. I also like to smooth out the edges whenever you have a joined area, so you can keep it looking like this, which is separate, or press down, maybe get a little bit more water again and smooth out those edges. That's to attach two pieces of clay together. As you attach those pieces, you may notice that if you add too much water, the clay also gets to be very hard to work with. It gets really, just starts turning into water basically in your hand. As you do that, you can begin to mold the clay back and forth in your hands. Your hands are going to draw out a lot of that moisture from the clay. If there's too much water, even beyond that, as you work with the clay, you can also roll it out and just set it aside for about 10 to 15 minutes before coming back to this clay that you feel is too wet, mixing it around in your hands, kneading it back and forth. Once it's workable again, then you're ready to dive right back in. You may also notice at points, if you work with it too much and you haven't added any water lately, the clay might start breaking and feeling brittle, crumbling apart. If you ever need to rehydrate your clay, or if you've left it out for too long, you just take a little bit of water, pat it around a little bit, and again, you're mixing it back and forth in your hand. It might feel sticky at first because it's freshly coated with water, but the more you knead it around, the more it will regain its plasticity. The plasticity is a type of clay that is really easy to work with, nice and stretchy, and doesn't stick in your hands. If you've got a lot of clay that was accidentally left out overnight, you didn't put it back in your tub or something like that, you can just take that whole chunk of clay, dunk it in some water, set it aside for about 5 minutes, then come back to it, work with it again in your hands until you feel it starting to be workable again. You may have to do this several times if it's been left out that long. Just dunk it, work with it, and once your hands aren't sticky anymore and it feels good to work with, you know you've got some clay that's great to work with again. Once your pieces have dried for several days, I'm talking 3 or 4 days, just to be sure it's completely free of all moisture, you'll be able to touch it. It's going to feel hard. It's going to feel room temperature. It won't feel cold anymore. Then you know you can work on decorating it with some colors. We've included markers for you. You'll be able to marker your pieces if you also have any types of paints at home, acrylic, tempera, watercolor paints. You can absolutely use those as well. When it comes to markers, you're going to notice that after you use them for a while, they will begin to dry out. That's because the clay will actually suction out the moisture from your marker. I like to have a bowl of water handy for that. What you'll do is you'll be able to draw, and as you go, when it starts to dry out, just like it has right there, just dip it quickly into the water, give it a few taps to shake it out, and you'll be able to continue using it just as you were before. Now, if you'd like a little bit more of a watercolor effect, where the lines don't look quite as crisp and you want them to be blurry, you can always just dip it in the water, leave it really thick with water, and as you draw, you'll start getting thicker lines. If you leave it really thick, you could even get more pastel lines. And lighter and lighter. If you ever need to reconcentrate this color again, we'll close this up, set it aside, and try to store it vertically so that the ink from the marker runs right back down to the tip. And in a couple of minutes, it will be as good as new. You'll be able to continue working. I hope you have a great time creating all of your pieces. Happy spring break!